pressing problems. Let's now move on to our international story segment here on Brass Tacks. Even as U.S. President Joe Biden visited Ukraine and Poland, China's top diplomat Wang Yi traveled to the opposite direction to Russia. The optics of these two trips, which are taking place just days before the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, underscores the sharpening geopolitical fault lines between the world's two biggest superpowers. While Biden's stroll with Zelensky in Kiev sent a strong message to Putin, Wang Yi's visit to Russia put the spotlight on China's attempts at diplomatic balancing act. Since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, China has offered Putin diplomatic as well as financial support. But for now, they have refrained from overt military involvement. And the U.S. fears that could change very soon. Now, these two fronts come even as ties between the United States and China have hit an all-time low. The U.S. is concerned about issues including China's military activity around Taiwan. Beijing has accused the U.S. of creating quasi-alliances like the Quad to counter and contain China. And the most recent one, the spy balloon saga, which has further deflated ties between Washington and Beijing. In the backdrop of this sort of tense ties between the two biggest economies in the world, Wang Yi hailed China's ties with Russia. He said that China-Russia ties are rock solid and mature in character. They will withstand any test in a changing international atmosphere. Wang Yi also said that together with Russia, China is ready to resolutely defend its national interests and dignity and promote mutually beneficial cooperation in all areas. Meanwhile, it does not end with just Wang Yi. According to a Wall Street Journal report, Chinese President Xi Jinping is preparing to visit Moscow for a summit with Vladimir Putin sometime in April or in early May. This comes even as China is hoping to play a more active role in ending the war in Ukraine. As per the report, Xi Jinping is likely to push for multi-party peace talks and reiterate China's calls for not using nuclear weapons. Xi Jinping's trip is likely to coincide with Russia celebrating the World War II Victory Day in early May over Germany. At that same event last year, the Kremlin had likened Ukraine's elected leaders to neo-Nazis. Now, between Chinese expansionism and Putin's war against Ukraine, the world is wary of both countries, so it's only natural that they have found each other. After Russia invaded Ukraine, most Western countries imposed strict sanctions on Russia, but not China. In fact, China's overall trade with Russia has hit a record high of $190 billion in 2022. That is a 30% increase compared to the year before. While Russian trade with the United States, UK, and EU countries slumped in 2022, Russian imports from China increased 13% to $76 billion. And its exports to China increased by 43% to $114 billion. A large part of it, in fact, almost half of all of the Russian government's annual revenues come from oil and gas, and its sale to EU countries has plummeted over the past year. But Russia has managed to overtake Saudi Arabia as China's top crude oil supplier. The one area that is untapped is arms exports. China has been expanding its military production capabilities and is now the world's fourth largest arms exporter. The United States claims that Chinese firms have already provided non-lethal support to Russia and that it has new information suggesting that Beijing could soon provide lethal support. An influx of Chinese weapons could be a game changer for Russia, which is grappling with a dwindling supply of weapons. At the moment, Russia is overmatched by the West, which has been providing weapons and military aid to Ukraine. But if China comes along, any advantage that Ukraine has had because of industrial capacity of the West would soon disappear. Beijing is also keeping the line of communication open with the European Union. In fact, several European leaders will be making a beeline to China, if not having already made a beeline to China. In fact, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited China in November of last year. A business delegation accompanied him, sending out a message that Berlin is keen to boost its commercial ties with Beijing. Xi Jinping also held talks with European Council President Charles Michel. This was via video link in April of last year. And then late last year, Charles Michel also visited Beijing and met with Xi Jinping. French President Emmanuel Macron has plans to visit China in March. He will be there to discuss energy, trade, and of course, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni accepted an invitation by Xi Jinping when they met at the APEC summit last November. Now, these high-profile visits indicate that China has a lot at stake in Europe and vice versa. The European Union and China were the largest partners for trade in goods in 2021, raking in about 1.9 billion euros every single day. The EU exported a little over 200 billion euros worth of goods to China and imported 470 billion euros worth of goods from China in 2021. The top 10 European investors accounted for 70% of all investment in China in 2021. Since 2011, China has emerged as one of the European Union's largest source of imports. Europe is also home to a large number of Chinese students who are attending universities there. So, given that the stakes are so high, would China risk getting militarily involved in Russia? China is likely to strengthen its cooperation with Russia in accordance with its own national will and its national security concerns. But exporting weapons could lead to Western sanctions against China, putting its ties with both Europe and the United States in jeopardy and burning all bridges with capitals in Europe, as well as, of course, with Washington. So China might end up supporting Russia clandestinely by supplying weapons via state-controlled companies, North Korea, or even proxies like the Wagner Group, rather than directly supply it to the Russian military. Now, what is interesting is that we're given to understand, and Wang Yi mentioned this today in Russia, that Xi Jinping will be unveiling a peace plan, the Chinese peace plan, to try and broker peace between the warring countries, Russia and Ukraine. Whether or not there are any takers for it, either in Ukraine or in its Western allies, that is something that needs to be, we have to wait and watch for. That's a wrap. Thanks very much for tuning in to Brass Tacks. Good night.